Hi. So I'd like to pick up reading where I left off in chapter 4 of Already Free by Bruce Tift. And so I did 2 readings, and the last reading was about committing to our experience of anxiety and about how sometimes we bind our anxiety to a specific issue. And the next piece is about when we bind our anxiety in groups. It's really fascinating. Okay. The phenomenon of binding anxiety can also be seen at a group level. Whether that group is a social network, a work team, or a spiritual organization, most groups are not very conscious of or skillful in dealing with the anxiety that is guaranteed to arise when a number of people relate to each other. Therefore, it's almost inevitable that any group will experience a scapegoating process. In the same way that we compartmentalize our anxiety and tell ourselves that it's about one particular issue, a group will unconsciously and frequently select a subgroup to feel an emotion or energy that other members don't want to feel. Perhaps it's anger or sadness or a fear of being left out. The subgroup is usually made up of the person or people with the greatest unresolved issues and weakest boundaries around the particular energy that the group doesn't want to feel. In a very powerful unconscious process of induction, this person ends up expressing, for example, not only her own anger, but also the anger of the rest of the group. The rest of the group gets to feel relatively free of anger and therefore of anxiety. Meanwhile, this one person or subgroup appears to be the problem. Just as Patty believed dating to be the cause of her anxiety, the group begins to think, if we could only get rid of this person, then our group would be great. Often the next step is to actually get rid of the problem. That is, the person holding the energy for the group. But of course, once that happens, it's only a matter of time until the group starts to experience anger arising somewhere else. The anger is still there in the group. If they're not willing to acknowledge it, feel it, and work with it at the group level, a new subgroup or person will be chosen as the next location of the problem. This is also a very challenging issue in working with families. As a family therapist for social services in the 1980s, time after time I would meet with families that would be unconsciously scapegoating a child. Because young children are like psychic, emotional sponges. They tend to absorb whatever their parents have repressed and won't deal with. The child then tends to identify with that energy and act it out. The parents can then enable the child to continue acting out what they don't want to feel while punishing or rejecting the child for being that way. Okay, so that sort of wraps up this piece that he talks about of binding our anxiety to things. And this next part of the book is going into committing to this experience of anxiety. This is some of my favorite stuff. Okay. When we investigate the experience of anxiety, the Western approach takes the experience itself as its starting point. What triggered the anxiety? How can we work with it? How can we make it go away? How can we improve our circumstances so we don't have to feel so anxious and divided? As discussed, a Buddhist approach suggests that how we relate to the experience of anxiety is more important than the details of the experience. If we start by taking our experience at face value, We're starting from the assumption that this experience has its own real, objective existence. If what I am feeling has an independent reality, that is, if such a thing as anxiety, I love it. He's like putting open quotes around anxiety as if maybe it's not a thing, maybe more an event, or just like the weather, like something passing through, or like energy, vibration. But we wouldn't call those things. We would call those movements, or call those maybe verbs or adjectives, or a verb adjective combo. Adjective verb. Okay, back to reading. Then there seems to be a subtle but powerful implication that the self who is aware of the anxiety must have its own independent reality too. Anxiety and I must be two fundamentally separate things. There is, as discussed previously, the vivid appearance of a self, seemingly with its own essential nature, relating to a world made up of separate objects, feelings, thoughts, and so on. Without examination, we are understandably likely to take this appearance as an accurate experience of reality. This perpetuates our sense of being a small, separate, alienated self, living in a vast, impersonal universe. This significant, alienated, problematic self seems so vivid that we believe it's a representation of reality. Since it so obviously appears to be there, it must be there. And so, of course, it makes sense to protect and improve this self. Yeah, right. This significant, alienated, problematic self seems so vivid that we believe it's a representation of reality. It so obviously appears to be there. It must be there. So it makes sense to protect and improve this self. This could be called the egoic process, the process through which we generate and maintain the experience of a solid, continuous, significant, and personal self. Unfortunately, this project of selfhood is never going to be truly successful. As much as the Western approach might improve our ability to engage with our lives, in reality, everything is always changing. We can never solve our lives. Life is not a thing. I can hear my attitude coming through here. I'm going to go back to being more neutral with reading. Life is not a thing that can be broken and then fixed. Life is a process, and we can never solve a process. We can only participate in this process, either consciously or unconsciously. We aren't going to find the perfect formula and then coast our way through life. We can't make pain go away. Although we can reduce unnecessary suffering significantly. The more deeply we investigate, the less we can grasp or even know this apparent self that Western psychology takes as its foundation. From the Buddhist perspective, the nature of life and of our own mind is basically open. There is no foundation, no ground to stand on. We can consciously participate in this open nature, but we can't know it. On a subconscious level, we seem to understand this. We sense that we're identifying with a self that cannot be located. The inevitable consequence is a pervasive and chronic anxiety. Our efforts to feel safe and comfortable are constantly being undermined by the evidence of our actual experiencing. Anxiety from a spiritual path perspective can therefore be understood as the accurate perception of the basically open nature of life as seen from the reference point of egoic process. I'm going to read that again. Anxiety from a spiritual path perspective can therefore be understood as the accurate perception of the basically open nature of life as seen from the reference point of egoic process. The egoic process is that aspect of the self that quite understandably wants to feel comfortable, happy, safe, secure, and in control. And when faced with the reality of how open everything actually is, that part of us basically freaks out. From this point of view, we can see that anxiety is actually a necessary part of our path. As we move in the direction of waking up, increasing our tolerance of more and more awareness or open mind, we will inevitably experience anxiety. At some point or another, anybody committed to a spiritual path may find it important to commit to the experience of anxiety as an approximation of an open state of mind. I think that's so beautiful because I know when I'm experiencing anxiety, I just want to get rid of it. And it's like, this is bad. I want to get it gone. But he's saying, that it's inevitable and we want to increase our tolerance of more and more awareness, more and more capacity for this open mind state. And so it's like important to commit to the experience of anxiety as a layer of really being in that open state of mind. And this is not because reality is itself anxiety producing, but because the inevitable engagement of the personal self with non-personal reality will be experienced as a threat to this self. That is, as anxiety. When I say committing to our anxiety, I mean doing the difficult work. Difficult because it goes against both our biology and our cultural conditioning. Training ourselves not to try to escape our anxious feelings. It even means to learn to appreciate them, explore them, feel them, and see for ourselves whether they are as much of a problem as we think they will be. If anxiety is not a problem, and if we understand that it's actually an essential part of our path of waking up, then we might want to practice this attitude of commitment. I am ready to feel anxious at any second, we might say to ourselves, and to work with the energy of anxiety for the rest of my life. Oh my God, I love that. I'm ready to feel anxious at any second and to work with the energy of anxiety for the rest of my life. I give up my fantasy of a life free of anxiety. That's powerful. The anxiety we feel often seems to be associated with particular circumstances. If my wife is significantly late coming home, or if I have to go to the doctor, if my daughter's not speaking to me, I will likely feel anxiety. But if I look more closely, I see that each of those situations is forcing me to acknowledge how open my life actually is. Yes, my wife might have gotten into an accident. Yes, I could have undiagnosed cancer. Yes, it could be that I am a bad father. All of those things are completely possible. There is no guarantee of happy endings. We are always aware of that on some deep level. But such circumstances, it turns out, become reminders of the fundamental openness of our lives in general. Underneath the particulars, we're anxious because these life dramas force us to acknowledge that we don't actually know what's going to happen. We have no way of really controlling our circumstances, which from an egoic point of view is very uncomfortable. If we examine our experience more broadly, we may discover that we can't actually answer any of the most important questions about our lives. Do we really know who we are? Do we know the meaning of life? Do we know how to have healthy intimacy? Do we know how to parent our children without passing on our unresolved issues? Do we know what happens when we die? Do we even know if we should be doing this type of work or living in this town? Upon investigation, we find we don't know anything that's really important. A lot of us don't even know what we want to eat for dinner tonight. If anxiety is our egoic response to the truth of not knowing, of openness, then we really might want to consider committing to the experience of anxiety because it's not going anywhere. I love this next part. The metaphor of bardo. I find the Tibetan Buddhist concept of bardo to be a useful metaphor for learning to tolerate the experience of openness and anxiety. From a traditional religious perspective, bardo is a series of experiential realms that consciousness enters after death. Each realm is less open, more solid, and more contractive than the one before. When awareness can finally tolerate the degree of openness and anxiety of a particular realm, then that's the realm in which it reincarnates. Its tolerance for openness determines where it will stay. It cannot incarnate into more openness than it can handle. Personally, I have no idea what happens when we die. I'm more interested in applying the metaphor of bardo to the way our minds work on a daily basis. We could consider that moment after moment we are incarnating into, identifying with particular states of mind. We're incarnating into certain attitudes, positions, beliefs, and roles. For example, when working as a therapist, I take on a deep identification with that role. I found that this role actually supports a greater tolerance of open mind than, let's say, when I'm in conflict with my wife in my role of partner. Even within my role as therapist, I may be captured by a variety of states of mind, depending on my tolerance of anxiety and openness at any given moment. When I recognize the feeling of being captured, I have learned to ask myself, what more open experience am I refusing to participate in right now? From this point of view, our practice is to gradually learn to metabolize, to contain and process in our embodied experience more and more anxiety. That way, over time, we can integrate more and more experience of open mind or awareness into our daily life. As we gradually become more and more able to go deeply into our anxiety rather than be stopped by it, we discover that it's not a problem. We then have more frequent moments of open awareness. Gradually, we find that the familiar ups and downs of daily life are being held in an environment of openness. And we find that this actually changes the meaning of our familiar experience. We find that form, experience as inseparable from awareness, is not only workable, but may even be blissful. Okay. From both the developmental and Buddhist views, we are now left with a dilemma. Acknowledging the truth of our experience will often require feeling our immediate anxiety. It could be like liquid lava flowing through our whole system, or it could just be like a weight on top of the chest. It could be like an airy sort of gas in the ribs and lungs. It could be a zipping of electric lightning going up through and out. It could be like a real squeeze of the head, like the bones getting really tight and the muscles wrapping around and the eyes getting pinched up and the base of the skull feeling like really compressed. It could be just, my experience of anxiety is it comes in so many different weather patterns. And so he's saying here, we're left with this dilemma of acknowledging the truth of our experience and how that will actually require us to feel our immediate anxiety. But resisting the truth of our experience results in chronic anxiety. Right? It's like something we're always running from, and we have to kind of stay a certain distance away, and we have to maintain all the things that we do in order to kind of pad ourselves from that experience. Either way, we will feel anxiety. Oh, I love it. This goes back to the sort of previous chapter where I was talking about Odysseus and him tying himself to the mast because he wanted to experience the Song of the Sirens. And he knew that the consequence, if he didn't tie himself to the mast, would be that he'd throw himself overboard and die on the rocky cliffs. But he really wanted to hear that song. And so he made the choice. And so he had his men tie him to the mast and plug their ears with stuff and just make him sit through it. And so he really committed to the experience that he was going to be having. And what I loved about that story was just understanding that no matter what decision we make, there's no decision we can make that won't have some feelings come up that we'd rather not experience. And so it's like, if we get caught in trying to make a decision that's based on like, well, in this situation, then I won't have anything bad or anything that I don't want to feel come up. And just kind of grappling with the reality that that doesn't exist. There's no decision and there's no situation where there will be no feelings that are hard to feel coming up. And so I love what he's saying. It's like either way, it's like we can try to avoid, we can just feel our anxiety in the present moment, or we can try to avoid our anxiety. And it's like either way, we are going to be feeling anxiety. It's like you can't escape it, really. And rather than looking more deeply at this disturbing dilemma, our usual unconscious response is to try to avoid either choice. Yeah, right. There's the choice making. It's like we're not even going to make the choice. We do so by manifesting symptoms that appear to explain and bind the anxiety. As symptoms, we can claim that the cause of our anxiety is an aberration. We acknowledge that there is anxiety, but we resist owning it as a necessary part of life. We can then involve ourselves in the project of seeking relief from these symptoms through a variety of means. But if we were to successfully resolve these problems, we would lose the distractive function they provide. At that point, we might actually have to examine the root cause of our anxiety. We would then be faced with our worst fears. From the developmental perspective, this would mean facing our core emotional vulnerabilities. From the fruitional perspective, we would face raw, immediate experiencing, which provides no support for personal identity. So we have two choices. We can avoid the truth and instead experience the exhausting but particularly unconscious disturbance of chronic anxiety. Or we can commit to the truth and live with the conscious disturbance of emotional vulnerability, with no support for personal identity. Until we train ourselves to rest in the embodied experience of anxiety and disturbance, to find out for ourselves that we are not harmed by it, and to understand that these difficult experiences are completely legitimate and valid parts of life, we will unconsciously look for some way out. We will be searching for some resolution, or at least some reliable distraction. Like a really good one, like a distraction that's going to last us forever. I love what he said here about that if we can kind of commit to this embodied experience of anxiety and disturbance, like just from a sensational level, not like the story about it, but like, oh, prickles, or like a sinking pit in the belly, or, just like get to know the weathered pattern of it, the vibration of it. That when we do that, what we discover is that we're not harmed by it. And this has been really important piece for me. Like over the last, it's been 2 months now of me experiencing anxiety in the nighttime, and it's been big anxiety, not like little anxiety or medium anxiety, it's big anxiety. And so it's been like liquid molten lava coursing through my entire system. And I was really disturbed by it, and it was giving me insomnia. And what was happening is that it was keeping me up all night. It was like the second I would start to slip into like relaxation, the relaxation was sort of a threat. For me to relax really threatened the part of me that was like trying to make sure everything was okay. It's like if I were to fall asleep now, then I wouldn't be keeping tabs on everything being okay. And so, or thinking, just like I would be setting down my threat detection, like there's this thing they call the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenals. And its function is to work like the radio control tower at the airport, where these guys are, I don't know why I assume they're men. These genderless beings are in this radio control tower, and they're watching the air traffic come in. And their job is to scan for threat. And so that way they can sort of manage and make sure no problems happen. And so this HPA is like our threat detection system. And so falling asleep was it was a threat to my threat detection system. It was like, no, you can't fall asleep, because then you'd be putting down this threat detection system, and this threat detection is what's keeping us safe. And so, so I would start to fall asleep and then get hit with another wave of adrenaline. It would just go on hour after hour after hour. It was like, so, this happened. I seem to be coming out of it, and I'm just getting blips, not every single night, but, it started being like every other night, and then every 3 nights, once a week. And, and it started to decrease a bit. Like there was, it would sort of arise. And because it's been going on for so long, and I just decided, well, I'm just going to commit to my experience of anxiety. Like this is not going away. And so I would settle into just feeling where it was in my body and placing my hands there and just being opening to the energy of it, and it's literally like a volcano. And so, really feeling it. And I would hear Bruce Tift's words here of just like what we discover is like that it doesn't actually harm us. And that's really what I was discovering is like, this can be coursing through my system, and somehow I'm still okay. And so, and the following day would kind of be like a little bit of almost like a hangover experience. Like it was still in me a little, but that makes sense, right? Like I just was like inside of a volcano. So I'm getting out and it's like, I'm still going to be like a little bit burned up, a little hot, but then discovering that even that didn't harm me. Like even being in the aftermath of that, I was still okay. And so, I think this piece is like really important when he says that until we train ourselves to rest in the embodied experience of anxiety and disturbance, and to find out for ourselves that we're not harmed by it, to understand these difficult experiences are completely legitimate and valid parts of life. Like this is part of this experience. We'll consciously look for some way out, and we'll be searching for some resolution, or at least some reliable distraction. And this also brings to mind this piece from Buddhism that Pema Chodron shares a lot, and also it's in the yogic texts too, about like the root of our suffering really stemming from attachment and aversion. And so I feel like those two things are the things that we, this root of like trying to get away from our experience and this sort of fantasy that this thing is not a part of life and we could have something else. Okay.